Barrett Blackwell was 30 seconds away from marrying the senator's daughter and securing an empire. The champagne was chilled, the elite of New York was smiling, and his father was finally proud. But then, a single photo flashed on his screen. It wasn't from a private investigator or a jealous rival. It was from his 6-year-old daughter, Ruby, whom he hadn't seen in 5 years. The photo showed his ex-wife, Inaya, collapsed on a cold kitchen floor. But it wasn't her illness that made Barrett's heart stop. It was what was pinned to the wall behind her, a piece of paper Barrett recognized instantly. It was the $1 million check his father swore Inaya had cashed to leave him. Except it wasn't cashed. It was covered in dart holes, used as a target for 5 years of silent agony. Welcome home, my beautiful family, to the Mr. James Family Channel. It is a blessing to have you here today. Before we dive deep into this journey of the heart, I want us all to take a moment of silence. If you are carrying a burden today, if you feel weary or lost, remember, you are not alone. In this family, we lean on each other. Heavenly Father, we ask for your hand to rest upon every person listening right now. Grant them the strength to face their unseen battles, the wisdom to see through lies, and the peace that surpasses all understanding. Let every home be filled with your protection, and every heart be filled with your grace. Amen. Barrett Blackwell's fingers shook as his phone buzzed inside the pocket of his tailored tuxedo. It wasn't fear that made them tremble, it was resistance. 30 seconds. That's all the wedding planner had whispered earlier, her smile tight, professional, practiced. 30 seconds before the doors opened, 30 seconds before the world watched him seal a future that had been negotiated long before love ever entered the room. 30 seconds before applause, before cameras, before power smiled back at power. Barrett inhaled slowly, the way his father had taught him as a boy. Control the breath, control the moment, control the outcome. The cathedral behind him glowed with money, crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, marble floors, polished until they reflected the ceiling like obedience. Somewhere inside, a senator's daughter adjusted her veil, surrounded by women who had already decided this marriage was historic. Outside, the bells rang. Not loud, not urgent, just perfect, expensive perfection. The sound slid through the stone walls and settled in Barrett's chest, heavy and ceremonial. Each chime felt like a nail being gently tapped into place. This was it. Then the phone vibrated again. Once. Barrett frowned. No one was supposed to contact him. The device was meant for emergencies only, the kind that moved markets or destroyed reputations. He slid his hand into his pocket anyway, irritation flickering across his face. The screen lit up. A photo, no subject line, no greeting, just an image. At first, his mind rejected it. The lighting was wrong, too dull, too close. The angle uneven, as if taken by someone too small to understand framing. His eyes skimmed the image quickly, searching for context. Then they stopped. His throat closed. The world narrowed to pixels. Inaya. She was on the floor, not posed, not resting, not dramatic, collapsed. The kitchen tiles beneath her looked old, cracked, the color of something once white that had given up. One arm was folded awkwardly beneath her body, shoulder bent at a painful angle. Her hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. Her skin, once warm, glowing, looked ashen. Her lips were dry, cracked. Barrett's heart slammed once, hard. "No," he whispered, though no one could hear him. Then his eyes moved. Behind her, on the wall, pinned crookedly with red darts like puncture wounds in paper flesh. A check, white, clean, unmistakable. $1 million. His $1 million. The same check his father had slid across a polished desk 6 years ago. The same check that had ended a marriage without a single goodbye. Except it wasn't endorsed. No signature, no bank stamp. It wasn't cashed. It was torn, punctured, used for target practice. Barrett's breath stuttered. His pulse roared in his ears so loudly he almost didn't notice the message beneath the photo. Almost. The words were short, uneven, spelled with the kind of mistakes that came from small fingers and panic. "Daddy, Mommy won't wake up, I'm scared." His vision blurred. Not from tears. Not yet. From disbelief. The name at the top of the screen burned into him like acid. Ruby. The sound of it echoed in his skull. His daughter, not a rumor, not a manipulation, not a story his father had dismissed with a wave of his hand. A real child, 6 years old, holding a phone too big for her hands, standing alone. The bells outside rang again. They sounded farther away now, like they were happening to someone else. Barrett's mind fractured. 1,000 thoughts tried to surface at once, but only one survived. If the check was never cashed, then everything he believed was wrong. The cathedral doors loomed in front of him, tall and carved with saints who looked down in silent judgment. Through the thick wood, he could hear movement, a cough, a shuffle, the soft murmur of people waiting to witness history, his history, the future Arthur Blackwell had designed, a future built on a lie. Barrett's chest tightened, sharp and painful. His father's voice rose uninvited in his memory, smooth, certain, absolute. "She took the money." Barrett swallowed. The image of the check, riddled with darts, refused to leave his mind. Rage followed close behind. Hot, violent, focused. Someone had played God with his life, with hers, with a child's. The wedding planner appeared again, eyes bright, fingers twitching. "Mr. Blackwell," she whispered, "we're ready." Barrett looked at her like he didn't recognize the language she was speaking. Ready? For what? He glanced down at his phone once more. The image hadn't changed. Inaya was still on the floor. Ruby was still waiting. His heart made the decision before his mind could argue. Barrett stepped back. Then another step. The planner's smile faltered. "Sir," he turned. Not slowly, not dramatically. He turned with the force of a man tearing himself out of a coffin. The bells rang again. This time, he didn't hear them at all. Barrett Blackwell broke into a run. As he pushed past the cathedral doors, phone clenched in his hand, a single terrifying thought slammed into his chest. If Inaya never took the money, what did his father do to make her disappear? 6 years earlier, Barrett Blackwell had been a different man. Not kinder, not gentler, just unfinished. He still believed effort mattered. That loyalty meant something. That truth, if placed plainly on a table, would eventually rise to the surface on its own. That belief would not survive the night his father called him into the study. The room had been designed to intimidate without ever raising its voice. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed Manhattan glittering below, cold and precise, like a reminder of who ruled and who watched from the ground. Leather shelves lined the walls, filled with books Arthur Blackwell never read but insisted on owning. Power liked the illusion of wisdom. Arthur sat behind the desk, hands folded, posture relaxed. That alone should have warned Barrett. "When you sit down," Arthur said, gesturing to the chair, "it's because the conversation is already over." Barrett didn't sit. "What is this about?" he asked. Arthur sighed softly, the way a man does when disappointed by someone else's lack of foresight. "Inaya," he said. The name landed between them. Barrett felt the tightening immediately deep in his chest. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in weeks. Not since she'd stopped answering calls. Not since the unanswered messages piled up like unanswered prayers. "She's gone," Arthur continued, calm as a man reading weather reports, "and she made sure she left, compensated." Arthur reached into a folder and slid papers across the desk. The sound of paper moving over polished wood was quiet, controlled. Barrett stared at the documents but didn't touch them. "What did you do?" he asked. Arthur's eyebrow lifted slightly. I protected you. Barrett finally stepped forward and looked down. Bank statements, transaction confirmations, dates, amounts, routing numbers. $1 million. Transferred cleanly, Inaya Williams. The name typed neatly, professionally, without emotion. Barrett's mind resisted the conclusion, rejected it. He searched for flaws, the way he'd been trained to audit contracts. There had to be a loophole, a misprint, something forged. Arthur watched him closely. She approached me, Arthur said. Not the other way around. She said she wanted freedom, privacy, a life without Blackwell oversight. Barrett's jaw tightened. She was pregnant, Barrett said quietly. Arthur waved the thought away. A rumor, an emotional ploy. Women use those when they feel cornered. Barrett looked up sharply. Arthur leaned back in his chair. She knew what she was doing. She wanted money, distance, control. That's not who she is. Arthur smiled faintly. That's who everyone becomes when the price is right. The words settled into the room like smoke. Barrett picked up the documents then, scanning them again, slower this time. His pride wouldn't allow him to ask questions that might expose doubt. Doubt was weakness. Weakness was how men like Arthur lost control of their empires. She signed the agreement, Arthur continued. No contact, no claims, no future complications. Barrett said nothing. The silence stretched. Arthur stood, walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. From the height of the building, the city looked obedient, small. You were distracted, Arthur said. Love does that, makes men careless. I corrected the problem. Barrett folded the papers carefully. He didn't shout, didn't throw anything, didn't demand explanations. Pride doesn't yell. Pride closes doors quietly and pretends it never needed what was on the other side. That night, Barrett changed his number, deleted unread messages, blocked addresses. He told himself she'd chosen money over him, told himself love was just another liability the Blackwells couldn't afford. And the empire grew. 6 years passed in meetings and mergers, acquisitions and applause. Barrett became sharper, colder, unreachable. He let his father guide decisions that shaped entire industries. He stopped asking where things came from as long as they delivered results. Sometimes, late at night, Inaya's face surfaced in his thoughts. He pushed it down. He told himself the past had been settled, until now, until the image burned itself into his mind, a check, uncashed, destroyed. The truth didn't arrive gently. It hit like a structural failure. If she never took the money, then the documents were lies. If the documents were lies, then his father hadn't protected him. He'd controlled him. Barrett felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not anger, not grief, fear. Fear of what else had been altered, what conversations had been intercepted, what choices had never actually been his. He realized something else then, something colder. Arthur hadn't just removed Inaya, he'd erased her. And erasure on that scale required more than a check. It required systems, influence, power used quietly, efficiently, without witnesses. The empire Barrett stood on had not been built on success alone. It had been built on silence. And now, that silence was cracking. As Barrett stared at the image of the ruined check in his mind, one question refused to leave him. If his father could erase the woman he loved, without leaving a trace, what had he done to make sure she could never come back? Ruby Williams balanced on the chair like a tightrope walker, her small fingers wrapped around her mother's phone, as if letting go would break something important. Her legs shook, not from fear alone, but from exhaustion, the kind of deep, bone-tired exhaustion that comes from holding in worry for hours, for years, for the things you can't say. Her tiny mouth opened to speak. but no words came. She could hear the faint humming of the refrigerator, the wind rattling against the window, the tick of the wall clock, and yet it all seemed distant. The kitchen smelled like boiled rice and something sweet. Like syrup left on the counter too long, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the image on the screen and the sudden, urgent heat of responsibility pressing down on her chest. Her hand hovered over the dial button. 911. She knew she had to call. She'd seen cartoons, read books, and heard her mother speak of emergencies. She pressed the numbers. Her tiny voice trembled as she answered questions she couldn't fully understand. Yes, no, she can't. Her words tripped over themselves. She knew the operator wanted to help, but help felt far away. Help wasn't in the voice on the other end. Help was in the person who had created the world she barely remembered. Her mother's arm lay awkwardly across the kitchen floor, the soup pot untouched beside her, still steaming faintly as if the world had stopped in time. Ruby knelt beside Inaya, pressing her tiny hands against her mother's shoulder, willing warmth and comfort to flow from her fingertips. She remembered the nights when her mother spoke to her softly, words meant to soothe, meant to remind her she was loved even when life was cruel. "Your daddy loves you," Inaya had said more than once, her voice low, eyes far away as if staring at something only she could see. "Even if he doesn't know how to show it yet." Ruby didn't understand what it meant for someone to be a CEO. She didn't know why her grandmother, May, whispered warnings about the Blackwells, calling them dangerous people in hushed tones. But she remembered. The memory stayed with her like a shadow. She remembered the look in her mother's eyes whenever the name Barrett came up. Love, regret, hurt, all tangled together. And now in this moment, she understood something clearly. When you're scared, when the people you love are helpless, you do something. You do the only thing that feels like control. You send the truth to the person who matters most. Her thumb hovered above the contact name, trembling. Daddy. She had seen the word in a photo once, in her mother's texts to someone who had once been present in their lives, someone who had loved them, and then left. She pressed the name. The button glowed. The message box opened. Ruby's small fingers moved clumsily as she typed words she had memorized from the stories her mother had told her. Words that carried weight she didn't fully understand, but felt in her chest. "Mommy won't wake up. Please help. Ruby." She hit send before she could think about whether it was the right thing, before she could fear punishment. There was no time to wonder about consequences. There was only the urgent pulse of fear, the need for help, the need for someone who could make everything right again. The phone vibrated in her hand, and Ruby jumped, not with fear this time, but with expectation. Someone had to answer. Someone had to see. Someone had to come. She had waited years for this, though she didn't know it consciously. For 6 years, she had memorized every story, every whisper, every half-truth her mother had told her. She had memorized the inflections in her mother's voice, the subtle warnings, the quiet pauses before the word Blackwell left her lips. Ruby had been aware for longer than anyone suspected. She had remembered every detail, every look, every promise that was broken in silence. Now, in this kitchen, in the dim glow of the late afternoon light, Ruby's awareness crystallized into action. She would not allow fear to paralyze her. She would not let her mother fade into the floorboards. She would not let the world pretend the Blackwells were untouchable. She would reach across time, across distance, across power, and bring help. Outside, the wind rattled against the old apartment window. A single bird cawed somewhere above. The city beyond the walls of her small home moved, indifferent to the tiny drama unfolding inside. But Ruby did not care. The world could wait. Help had to come first. Her fingers shook as she watched the delivered notification appear under her message. Delivered. Not read yet, but it had traveled. Someone would see it. Someone had to see it. She thought about Barrett, not fully understanding him, not fully remembering the warmth he once held, but trusting, hoping, believing, hoping that someone who was her father in some distant and fractured way would respond, would save her mother, would save them both. Minutes passed like hours. Ruby's eyes never left the phone. She traced the screen with the tip of her finger, as if touching it could pull the answer from the other end. She whispered to herself, low and steady, the words her mother had taught her to survive. You can do this. You can make him come. You can make her wake up. You can make it right. The shadows in the room grew longer. Dust motes floated in the air like drifting sparks. The soup, still warm, steamed faintly, the smell of home lingering even as fear clawed through it. Ruby's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She clenched the phone tighter, knuckles whitening, and whispered again, "Please, Daddy, please." Then, from somewhere deep in the city, a sound came. Not a siren, not a shout, but something faster, closer, deliberate. A vibration, a heartbeat outside her own. Ruby stiffened, eyes wide, staring at the phone as if it might answer her unspoken prayers before she could even articulate them. She didn't know that across the country, a man in a tuxedo, poised at the brink of a life he had built for power and prestige, was about to feel a shattering ripple across the world he thought he controlled. She didn't know how quickly a single image, a single message, could undo years of distance, lies, and silence. But Ruby did know one thing. The person who mattered most had to come. And if he didn't, if he failed, then the world she loved, the person who had given her life, would be gone. Her small body shook with anticipation, fear, and a budding, fierce hope that only children who have survived years of uncertainty can hold. She whispered again, almost to herself, almost like a prayer, "Please, hurry." Ruby's eyes widened as the phone buzzed suddenly, a single notification that she didn't recognize from a number she had never seen. And in that moment, she realized the person on the other end might change everything, or nothing at all. Barrett's jet hit the tarmac with a jolt that rattled his teeth and shook his chest. Rain pounded against the windows like the city itself was warning him to slow down, to think. But thinking wasn't an option. Not tonight. Not when Ruby's trembling hands and desperate words replayed endlessly in his mind. The streets of New Orleans were slick and reflective, glowing with neon and fractured streetlights, the air heavy with humidity and the smell of wet concrete and something metallic, almost like iron. Barrett's car moved through the city as if it had always known this path, cutting past the French Quarter with its bright music and laughter, past the narrow streets where buildings leaned as if they carried the weight of decades of forgotten promises. The address Ruby had sent was unassuming. A small brick apartment building, peeling paint and rusted iron steps. Nothing like the Manhattan penthouses Barrett was used to. Nothing like the polished antiseptic halls of his father's empire. And yet, it pulsed with life. Unrefined, real, dangerous in its own way. He ran up the stairs two at a time, his expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles in the hallway. The smell hit him before he reached the door. Rust, boiled rice, the faint bitterness of unwashed dishes. It was a smell that spoke of struggle, endurance, and survival. It made his stomach twist in ways his boardrooms never could. He kicked the door open. Inaya was on the couch, thin, pale, shivering violently, covered by a threadbare blanket. Her eyes fluttered open for a fraction of a second, the recognition of him passing like a flicker of light through the storm. "Barrett?" Her voice was barely audible, rasped with fever and exhaustion. She tried to sit up, shaking, fragile and yet stubborn, defiant even in weakness. He dropped to his knees beside her, careful, silent. She looked older than he remembered, thinner than he expected. The years had been cruel to her, but not entirely. There was still a fire in her eyes, the same fire that had captivated him years ago, the one that refused to bow even when life demanded submission. He reached out, touching her arm lightly, willing her to feel the strength he wished he could give her. In the corner of the room, a small shoebox caught his eye. He leaned closer. It was stuffed with letters, thick envelopes, neatly stacked, each with his name scrawled in handwriting he remembered but had not seen in 6 years, each postmarked faithfully every week like clockwork, every letter he had never received. The weight of it hit him like a sledgehammer. She had written. Every week, she had reached for him across miles, across lies, across the cruel manipulations of his father, and all this time he had been blind, complicit without knowing it. He opened the first letter, the paper soft and slightly yellowed with age. "Barrett, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know I'm alive. I'm safe and I have your daughter. She has your eyes. She has your stubbornness. Please remember her even if you forget me." Barrett's hands shook. Not from anger, not from relief, not yet, but from the weight of every lost day, every unread word, every chance for reconciliation stolen from them both. Inaya's voice broke through the storm inside him. "Barrett, you're here." "I'm here," he said, his voice low, steadying. "I'm not going anywhere." She tried to smile, failed. Her lips cracked. He reached for water, gently lifting her hand to sip. She coughed weakly, letting him help. Barrett's eyes scanned the room. The apartment was modest, frayed at the edges, yet it radiated life. A single mug sat on the counter, dried tea leaves in the bottom. A small chair had scratches where Ruby had climbed, fallen, and climbed again. Clothes hung neatly over a chair, worn but cared for. A life lived in defiance of a man who had tried to erase them. And then he noticed something else. Letters had been returned, opened, marked, blocked. Every single week for 6 years, someone had intercepted her words. Every note, every heartfelt confession, every line about pregnancy, about Ruby, about their life, had been stolen from him. Barrett's chest tightened. Rage flared hot, immediate. His father had lied, manipulated, controlled, stolen 6 years of truth and love from him. Inaya's hand trembled as she reached for his, her eyes locked on his, fierce despite fever. "Barrett, they took everything from me too," she whispered. "I know," he said. The words barely left his lips before fury rose, coiling through him like fire. "I know now." Ruby watched silently from the corner, small but alert, her eyes wide, knowing that everything had changed the moment her message had been sent. She had done what no one else could. She had forced him to see. She had forced the past into the present, dragging secrets out from the shadows where they had festered for years. Barrett set the letters down carefully, one by one, as if touching them wrong might undo their reality. Each envelope told a story of pain, of hope, of defiance, a story he had missed and a story he would never allow to continue unseen. He looked at Inaya again. She was still weak, but the way her eyes glimmered through the haze of fever told him she was not broken. Not yet. Not ever. A noise outside made him freeze, the kind of subtle click that happens when someone moves silently, carefully, almost intentionally. Barrett's gaze shot to the door, his body tensing. Ruby clutched the edge of the couch. She had learned early to sense danger, even if she couldn't name it. The room went silent. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint patter of rain against the window remained. Barrett rose slowly, careful not to alarm Inaya further, and approached the door. He peeked through the peephole. A shadow moved outside. Too precise, too deliberate, not random, not a coincidence. Someone had found them, someone who knew this address, someone who knew they were here. Barrett's eyes narrowed. His mind raced. 6 years of lies, secrets, and betrayal had led to this moment, and now the past had arrived with intent. He stepped back toward Inaya and Ruby, positioning himself protectively, his hands curling into fists at his sides. The city outside continued to hum, unaware of the storm brewing in this small apartment. And then the knock came, soft, polite, deadly in its subtlety. Barrett's heart froze. Through the thin apartment door, a voice spoke, smooth and cold, just enough to make him realize this was no random visitor. "Mr. Blackwell, you've been hard to reach. May I come in?" The shadow outside shifted, and Barrett knew in an instant. The danger had arrived. Barrett's hands shook as he picked up the first envelope, the paper soft and slightly worn from years of handling, yet never read by him. The penmanship was familiar, delicate, deliberate, the kind of handwriting that carried the weight of memory and love. "I don't know if you'll read this," the letter began, words trembling across the page like the hand that had written them. "I don't know if your father lets you see anything I send. But I had a daughter today. Her name is Ruby. She has your eyes." Barrett's chest constricted. His throat burned. He sank onto the worn couch beside Inaya, careful not to alarm her. He could barely breathe. 6 years. 6 years of waiting, 6 years of silence, 6 years of words stolen from him by the very man who had called himself his protector. He opened another letter. "I tried applying for teaching jobs again. No luck. They say my name is flagged. I don't understand." Each line sliced deeper than the last. Each admission of struggle, of humiliation, of perseverance made his blood boil. He imagined her standing in endless lines, sending resumes, explaining herself, only to be told that her name was poison, that the world his father controlled had closed its doors to her. Barrett opened a third letter. "I won't ask you for money. I just want you to know I never took that check. I pinned it to the wall to remind myself what I survived." The words burned. They carried pride, suffering, and defiance all at once. Barrett's fingers trembled, his heart cracked. The empire he had built in the name of pride, power, and control suddenly felt like a hollow cage. Everything he thought he knew about loyalty, about love, about his life, it had been manipulated. His father had stolen not just truth, but time, not just trust, but life itself. Barrett's eyes shifted to Ruby, sitting quietly in the corner, small, attentive, wide-eyed. Her grip on the edge of the couch showed she knew somehow exactly how important these letters were. Somehow she understood that her mother's words were a lifeline to a father who had been blind to them for too long. Then it happened. The air in the room seemed to shift. The door opened. Arthur Blackwell stepped inside, every movement measured, deliberate, with the cold precision of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. His polished shoes tapped against the wooden floor, the sound echoing sharply in the small apartment. Barrett rose instantly, tension radiating from every muscle. The letters slipped from his hands, scattering across the floor like fallen soldiers. He didn't speak. Words would not do. His entire being screamed in anticipation and rage. Arthur's eyes swept the room, lingering on Ruby with a cold, unreadable expression. Barrett instinctively moved in front of her. "She's mine," Barrett said, voice low, controlled but threaded with warning. Arthur smiled, small and venomous. "And yet here she is, untouched, alive, flourishing, despite everything." Barrett's jaw tightened. The rage that had simmered in him for 6 years finally boiled over. "You took everything from us. Every letter, every message, every chance to rebuild what you destroyed. You lied to me, and you destroyed her life in the process." Arthur's expression did not change. Calm, composed, superior. He leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. I protected the family. You especially. Love clouds judgment. Emotion clouds judgment. I prevented chaos, Barrett. You should be grateful. Barrett's fists clenched. Grateful. You destroyed the one person who mattered most. You ruined her career. You tried to erase her existence. You robbed her of dignity and survival. And for what? Arthur's smile deepened, sharp as a blade. For the Empire. For stability. For the Blackwell legacy. You think you understand the stakes, boy, but you never did. Inaya stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Fevered but fierce. Stop talking, she said softly, each word deliberate. Your empire is built on lies, that's all it is. Arthur's gaze flicked toward her, almost amused. And yet here she is, alive, defiant, but fragile, pathetic, if not careful. Barrett's blood boiled. Every lesson of discipline, every hour spent controlling his temper in boardrooms, melted away. He stepped forward. You're done, Father. No more control, no more lies. Not with her, not with Ruby, not with me. Arthur's face hardened. You think you can stop me? His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every Blackwell generation before him. You're alone here, Barrett. And now you're risking everything. Your wealth, your reputation, your power. For what? A woman who isn't even yours and a child who barely knows you. Ruby gripped the edge of the couch, staring at her grandfather with wide, unflinching eyes. There was no fear there, only the faint spark of awareness that she had been right all along. Her message had summoned a reckoning. Inaya sat up slightly, holding the blanket around her shoulders. We are not yours to destroy anymore, Arthur. Not ever. Her voice, weak yet unwavering, cut through the tension like a knife. Barrett looked down at the scattered letters, the stories of love and resilience that had been intercepted, hidden, and discarded. Each one carried years of suffering, hope, and truth. He gathered them slowly, reverently, stacking them in his arms. I will make them heard, he said quietly, almost to himself, almost as a vow. Every single word, every single lie you told, exposed. Arthur's eyes narrowed. You really think you can do that? Barrett's voice dropped, measured, cold, but resolute. I don't think. I know. Ruby's tiny hand reached up to grasp his, and in that moment, Barrett felt the weight of his responsibility shift. He was not just a son confronting his father. He was a father now, finally present in a way he had never been before. Arthur's expression faltered for the first time. His calculated confidence, his illusion of control, trembled slightly in the presence of truth that could no longer be hidden. Barrett's eyes met Inaya's. She nodded slightly, the faintest smile of encouragement. He turned toward Arthur, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of 6 stolen years and the promise of justice to come. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air heavier. The rain outside pounded harder, echoing like drums of war. Arthur raised a hand almost lazily, but there was tension in the movement. So be it, Barrett. If you choose war, you will find I am not so easily defeated. Barrett didn't answer. He dropped the letters into a neat pile on the table and stepped closer. Each breath was controlled, every muscle tensed. The moment had arrived that would define the next chapter of their lives. One way or another. Ruby's eyes were wide, staring at her grandfather, understanding for the first time the danger that had always hovered over her and her mother. The apartment was quiet, yet the tension vibrated through the air like electricity. Arthur's smile returned, this time sharper, colder. You've come a long way, Barrett, but the past has a way of finding its way back, doesn't it? Barrett's fists tightened. He would answer soon. But not yet. He needed every piece, every letter, every truth he had just discovered to hit its mark perfectly. The rain outside fell harder, drumming on the windows like an approaching storm. Barrett knew one thing: the confrontation was far from over. Arthur's eyes glinted with menace as he leaned closer, whispering just enough for Barrett and Ruby to hear. "You think you can reclaim what I stole, but some debts cannot be repaid." And at that moment, Barrett realized the true scale of what they were up against, and that the next move could cost everything. Arthur Blackwell surveyed the cramped apartment like it was a crime scene, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every piece of evidence of the life he deemed unworthy. He moved with the grace of entitlement, polished shoes scuffing the old floorboards, each step measured, deliberate, heavy with judgment. "This is where you hid her." His voice was low, but the disgust dripped from every syllable. "Pathetic." Barrett stood frozen, body coiled like a spring, hands tightening into fists at his sides. Rage simmered beneath his skin, quiet, lethal. Arthur's gaze flicked to Inaya, pale and shivering on the couch. She barely opened her eyes, yet even in her weakened state, she met his gaze with a fire that refused to be extinguished. "She always was dramatic," Arthur said, the words casual, like noting the weather. Barrett's jaw clenched. "You blacklisted her," he said, each word deliberate, controlled, the fury behind it simmering just below the surface. Arthur's lips curved into a smile, slow and cold. "Of course. Actions have consequences, Barrett. Every choice has a price." The apartment seemed to shrink around them. Every letter, every note that had been intercepted, every week of silence screamed in Barrett's mind. The years of injustice were tangible, almost touchable. Arthur's eyes shifted toward Ruby, standing small but unflinching in the corner. A flicker of calculation passed through his gaze, sharp and dangerous. "That child," Arthur said coldly, "will be safer with Blackwell resources. Courts don't favor penniless mothers. Logic, Barrett. Strategy. Preservation." Inaya pushed herself upright, each movement a trial, her body racked with pain, but her eyes locked on Arthur's like steel. "You will not touch my daughter," she said. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of every fight she had endured, every insult and attack that had been thrown her way. Arthur laughed, a low, measured sound that carried authority and arrogance all at once. "You don't have a choice, Inaya. You've lived your life on the margins. You've depended on luck, and now luck has run out." Barrett's heart pounded. His father had underestimated the fire in both mother and daughter. They were not pawns, not victims, not silent observers. They were fighters, survivors, and finally the stakes had aligned. Inaya reached into her pocket, slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Barrett felt the tension in the air thicken. Arthur's eyes followed the movement, curiosity piqued, but caution absent. She pressed play, a digital recorder whirred to life. Arthur's own voice filled the apartment, smooth, arrogant, indisputable, but this time captured. "I blacklisted her," the recording began, Arthur boasting as he had countless times before to unseen allies. "And no one will question it. I've blocked every opportunity, intercepted every letter, every attempt to reach him. The girl will be isolated. The mother will be powerless. Nothing will escape my control." Barrett's blood ran cold, but the power in the room shifted. The arrogance of Arthur's voice now carried defeat within it. Every carefully constructed lie he had counted on was exposed in a single, undeniable confession. Ruby's eyes widened as she realized what her mother had done. She had seen the defiance in her mother's face years ago, a quiet strength she had inherited. And now, at 6 years old, she understood. They were not defenseless. Arthur's face paled slightly, the first crack in his composure. He stepped forward, lips moving, but no sound emerged. Barrett could see the panic, fleeting but undeniable, creeping into the edges of his father's expression. Inaya's voice was steady now, though weak. You lied to him. You stole our years. You thought you could control every piece of our lives, but you underestimated one thing. The truth has a way of finding its way back. Barrett moved closer to his mother, standing behind her as a protective shield. He glanced at Ruby, who had stepped forward slightly, small but courageous. The three of them formed an unspoken bond of defiance, a silent promise that they would no longer be manipulated. Arthur finally spoke, his voice strained but trying to regain authority. You think a recording can undo the work of a lifetime. You think a few letters change the facts. You are naive, weak, desperate. Barrett's hands tightened. I don't need to undo your empire. I just need to show the world your truth, every lie, every stolen letter, every attempt to erase them. Arthur's jaw clenched. He knew the threat was real now. The leverage he had wielded for decades, his wealth, his influence, his control, was slipping, and there was no way to stop it without confrontation. Inaya leaned back slightly, exhaustion etched into her features, but her eyes glimmered with satisfaction. I'm done hiding. I'm done running. I survived your games, and now you will face them yourself. Barrett bent down, gathering the letters, the recorder still playing Arthur's confession in the background. Everything comes out tonight, Barrett said, voice calm but resonant, carrying the weight of justice and fury combined. The world will hear the truth. You underestimated them. Me. Us. That was your mistake. Arthur's expression hardened, but there was now an edge of uncertainty. For the first time, he realized that his control was not absolute, that his empire of manipulation had cracks, and someone had found them. Ruby clutched Barrett's sleeve, her small voice whispering, Daddy, we did it. Barrett looked down at her, and a faint smile touched his lips. Yes, baby, we did it. Arthur's hands moved slowly toward the recorder, his mind calculating, weighing options, but Barrett's gaze locked on him, silent and immovable. You can't touch it, Barrett said. Every lie you've told is documented. Every attempt to erase us is recorded. You're done. Arthur's face twisted in frustration. For decades he had believed he was untouchable, that his power could manipulate and intimidate anything. But now, the very tools he had once wielded against others were being used against him. A tense silence fell over the apartment. The rain outside pounded the roof like drums of judgment, the electricity in the air palpable. Arthur took a slow step back. Barrett's presence, the letters, the recorder, all were immovable walls he could not climb over. Inaya reached out and touched Barrett's arm, weak yet filled with an unyielding strength. This ends tonight, she said. Arthur's lips pressed into a thin line. Rage, fear, and disbelief warred behind his eyes. He had always believed in control, always believed in intimidation, always believed he was untouchable. And now he was forced to confront a reality he had never imagined. His victims were not silent. They were united. They were determined, and they were prepared. Barrett glanced at Ruby, then back at Inaya. We protect her, he said, voice firm, decisive. Whatever happens, she comes first, always. Arthur sneered, but the sneer did not reach his eyes. He had no allies here, no control, only his own arrogance staring back at him in the mirror of truth he had created for them. The storm outside intensified, rain pounded against the windows, as if echoing the confrontation inside. Each drop was a drumbeat of impending change, of reckoning. Barrett bent down, pressed play again on the recorder, letting the world hear every word Arthur had once thought could remain hidden. Arthur's face drained of color as he realized the power had shifted irreversibly. Arthur's voice quivered as he spoke now, almost a whisper but lethal in its intent. You think this is over, but there are things you will never understand. Things that will destroy Everything you love. Barrett froze, the weight of the threat settling over him like a storm cloud, and he realized the battle had just begun. Barrett Blackwell signed the resignation papers with hands that no longer trembled. The pen felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed, heavier than any merger or acquisition. This was not about wealth, not about power, not about the empire his father had handed him, or tried to. This was about reclaiming what mattered most: family, trust, presence. The board of directors erupted the second the news hit their inboxes. Panic swept through the glass towers of Manhattan like wildfire. Investors called endlessly, their voices sharp, insistent, incredulous. "Barrett, you can't do this! The stock—" Barrett didn't answer. He let the phones ring. He let the messages accumulate. The empire could wait. The emails could pile up. The deadlines could burn. None of it mattered anymore. Not while Ruby learned to tie her shoelaces for the first time. Not while Inaya's pale hands shook as she tried to pour a cup of tea. He stayed in New Orleans, in the apartment that smelled of boiled rice, damp wood, and determination. He learned Ruby's bedtime routine, every ritual, every story, every whispered prayer before she drifted into sleep. He learned which songs soothed her, which books made her laugh, which questions kept her awake. And he answered them all, even when they were difficult, even when he didn't have the right words. He stayed by Inaya's side as she recovered, never speaking unless she spoke first. He watched her sleep, watched her struggle, watched her strength emerge through the fever, the pain, the exhaustion. He understood, in ways he had never understood before, that love required patience, humility, and presence, not control, not dominance, not power. Barrett cooked badly. The smoke alarm went off twice in the first week. The spaghetti he tried to boil became a gelatinous lump. The omelets refused to hold together, but Ruby cheered every bite, and Inaya laughed softly through her coughs. Barrett learned that perfection didn't matter in this kitchen. Presence did. Effort did. Love did. He cleaned quietly. The apartment, once a battlefield of neglect and survival, slowly transformed under his hands. Floors swept, dishes washed, windows wiped. Small acts, repeated daily, became gestures of devotion. He wasn't a CEO here. He wasn't a Blackwell in the traditional sense. He was simply a father, a husband, a man learning to follow the rhythm of life he had ignored for far too long. For the first time, Barrett didn't lead. He followed. He followed the needs of Ruby. He followed Inaya's cues. He followed the rhythm of this new life, messy, imperfect, demanding yet alive. And in following, he discovered something unexpected. Freedom. A strange liberation came from stepping down, from letting go of the titles, the prestige, the constant surveillance of wealth and influence. He found space to breathe, to think, to feel, to heal. Yet stepping down was not weakness, it was not surrender, it was strategy, humility, and courage combined. Barrett realized that leading had always been about ego, about demonstrating control. Following, in this case, was about love, about repair, about building what had been broken. The paradox was intoxicating, challenging, transformative. New Orleans watched them rebuild quietly. Neighbors noticed the man in tailored shirts kneeling to teach a little girl how to tie her shoes. They noticed the woman of resilience smiling gently at a man who was learning to be gentle in return. The city didn't forgive quickly, but it respected authenticity. And Barrett and Inaya exuded authenticity in every interaction, every gesture, every unspoken bond. Barrett read the letters once more, letters he had never allowed himself to see before. Each envelope carried a story of struggle, of hope, of unwavering determination. He wept quietly over the words, letting the truth sink into his bones. He had been blind, misled by pride and manipulation, but now he could see. Now he could act. Ruby climbed into his lap one night, the small bundle of warmth and energy curled against him. She whispered softly, "Daddy, are we safe now?" Barrett hugged her tightly. "We are, baby, I promise. We're safe now." Inaya sat nearby, watching, her own healing evident in the faint glow of her skin, in the subtle lift of her shoulders, in the quiet confidence in her eyes. She had endured everything and still stood, strong and unbroken. She was no longer a victim. She was a force, a mother, a survivor, a woman whose dignity had never needed a check to validate it. The apartment, once cramped and worn, became home, not because of walls or furniture, but because of presence, attention, and love. Barrett and Inaya rediscovered each other slowly, carefully. Conversations filled with laughter replaced silences of distrust. Meals shared at a small, chipped table replaced cold dinners of obligation and pretense. Barrett didn't lead. He listened. He learned. He followed the rhythm of family. Yet the world outside had not forgotten. The Blackwell name still carried weight, and not all of it had been diminished by resignation or exposure. Old rivals, jealous colleagues, lingering enemies, those who'd watched Barrett's empire crumble quietly, seethed in silence, waiting for cracks to appear. Barrett knew peace was temporary, fragile, and fiercely guarded. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the New Orleans skyline, casting the apartment in shades of orange and gold, Barrett paused by the window. Ruby slept quietly in Inaya's arms, exhausted from a day of laughter and learning. He understood the fragility of this new life, the vulnerability of stepping away from power. But he also understood its value. "I will protect them," Barrett whispered to himself, "always, not as a CEO, not as a Blackwell, but as their father, as their husband, as the man who finally understands what matters." The peace in the apartment was fragile, almost tangible. Every creak of the floor, every distant honk of a car outside, every rustle of the city reminded him that danger lingered. But Barrett had learned to move with patience, with strategy, with humility. The battle for family and truth had been won, but vigilance remained. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. Calm, polite, almost casual. Yet, every instinct in Barrett's body told him this was no ordinary visitor. He exchanged a glance with Inaya, whose hand tightened on Ruby's small shoulder. Barrett stepped forward cautiously, each movement measured, aware, tense. He reached for the doorknob, heart steady but pounding. The knock came again, a deliberate, insistent rhythm. Someone waiting, someone deliberate, someone who knew exactly what they wanted. Barrett exhaled slowly. He knew that stepping down had brought peace, had brought presence, but it had also invited attention. Powerful enemies rarely stayed silent. Old grudges and rivalries had long memories. He opened the door slightly, just enough to peer out. Shadows stretched across the hallway. A figure stood there, tall, composed, with an air of authority and danger. The face was unfamiliar, the intent unmistakable. Barrett felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Protection, strategy, defense, all instincts he had refined over decades, kicked in immediately. He realized once again that stepping down did not mean vulnerability. It meant being ready, being aware, being decisive when necessary. The figure spoke, calm but firm. "Mr. Blackwell, I believe it's time we discuss your retirement permanently." Barrett froze. The words carried weight, threat, and precision. He knew this was no casual visit. This was calculated. This was dangerous. This was the beginning of a new battle. A battle for the safety of his family, for the fragile peace he had built, for the life he was finally learning to live. Inaya's eyes met his. Ruby stirred slightly in her arms, sensing tension. Barrett's hand tightened around the doorframe, steady, ready, resolute. The quiet apartment, the small space of healing and recovery, suddenly felt like a front line. The past had not yet finished with them. The stranger stepped closer, shadowed by the hallway light, and whispered with chilling precision, "Step outside, Mr. Blackwell, or everything you've built here ends tonight." Barrett's pulse raced. He realized the safety he thought he had secured was only temporary, and the fight for his family's future was about to enter a far more dangerous arena. The small apartment was quiet, almost painfully so, as Inaya approached the wall. Her movements were deliberate, careful, each step measured after weeks of recovering her strength. She reached the nails that had held the check for 6 long years. Each dart hole seemed to carry a memory, a silent accusation, a reminder of what had been stolen from her. Barrett watched from a few feet away, his hands clenched but his posture respectful, understanding the gravity of the moment. The check wasn't just paper. It wasn't just a sum of money. It was years of pain, resilience, and silent defiance made tangible. Inaya's fingers brushed the edges, tracing the worn surface, the tiny punctures where the darts had struck. She lifted it from the wall slowly, as if pulling the weight of the past from the air. Barrett felt his chest tighten, realizing that this small gesture carried the weight of every lie, every betrayal, every stolen year of their lives. She turned to him and extended her hands, offering the check. "You thought this was my price," she said, voice calm, measured, but carrying steel beneath its surface. "But dignity isn't something you can buy." Barrett's throat tightened. Words caught. He had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was sharper, heavier, humbling. He reached out, taking the check with trembling hands, feeling the cool paper, feeling the weight of the unspoken lessons it carried. "I don't want forgiveness," Barrett said, finally finding his voice. "I don't want it handed to me. I don't want it because you feel obligated. I want to earn being here, to earn your trust, to earn my place in your life and Ruby's life." Inaya studied him. Her eyes, so used to seeing him as a stranger of wealth and coldness, now searched his face for sincerity. Every muscle, every flicker of expression, every hesitation in his tone mattered. Barrett didn't flinch under her gaze. He held it, steady, honest, vulnerable. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. The years of betrayal, the months of pain, the sleepless nights and unanswered letters, all of it condensed into this one moment. For the first time, the room felt like neutral ground, a space where nothing was owed and everything was possible. Ruby, sitting on the small couch, watched silently. Her eyes were wide with curiosity and cautious hope. She didn't understand all the nuances of dignity or forgiveness, but she understood one thing. Her parents were finally communicating, truly communicating, and that gave her hope. Inaya let the silence linger. She didn't nod fully. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply studied Barrett, measuring his words against the actions she had witnessed over the past weeks. The cooking attempts, the cleaning, the gentle attention to Ruby, the humility, the patience, the care that replaced arrogance. Then she nodded. Once. Not yes, not no, but a single deliberate gesture that said, "Try." Barrett's heart leapt. It wasn't permission, it wasn't absolution, it wasn't completion. It was the first thread of possibility, fragile and delicate, yet undeniably present. He understood immediately. Nothing could be rushed. Nothing could be taken for granted. This was a beginning. He placed the check gently on the small table, almost ceremonially. It was no longer a symbol of power or wealth. It was history, a memory that had shaped them both, and now it belonged to neither. They were free of it. For a long moment, they simply stood in silence. The air was heavy with the scent of rain that had dried on the windowsills, warm from the lingering sunlight of late afternoon. The weight of the past clung, but it was lighter now, tempered by the possibility of repair. Barrett moved closer to Inaya, not as a CEO, not as a Blackwell, but as a man seeking redemption, presence and partnership. "I will not fail you," he said softly, almost a vow, almost a prayer. "I will do whatever it takes to earn this, to earn us." Inaya's eyes softened slightly. The faintest lift at the corners of her lips betrayed the smallest acknowledgement of hope. She had survived alone for years, weathered storms of manipulation and injustice, and yet she was willing, carefully, cautiously, to allow him a place at her side. Ruby stirred and climbed into Barrett's lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we really okay?" Barrett hugged her close, feeling her warmth, her trust, her hope. "We're okay, baby," he said. "We're starting over, together." Inaya watched the scene unfold. Her heart swelled with cautious optimism. The man before her was not the arrogant, cold CEO who had walked out of her life years ago. He was different, changed, broken maybe, but earnestly trying, present, human. Barrett realized then that earning her trust would take more than words. Every action, every choice, every small gesture would have to reflect sincerity, humility, and patience. The road ahead was long, winding, uncertain, but it was theirs to travel. He placed the check back in the drawer, not as a symbol of money, not as a reminder of past pain, but as a reminder of what they had endured. A marker of survival, endurance, and the fragile, beautiful possibility of healing. Night settled over the city, the soft hum of distant traffic, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, and the occasional chirp of a bird returning home created a lull of calm. Barrett and Inaya sat side by side, Ruby asleep between them, a rare moment of peace in a world that had been relentlessly chaotic. Barrett reached for Inaya's hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't move closer either, but she let him hold her hand. That was enough. A beginning, a small, fragile acknowledgement of connection. They sat there quietly, listening to the soft rhythm of life around them. Every sound, every flicker of light, every breath carried weight, carrying possibility. The past still loomed, but they had begun to reclaim the present. Suddenly, Barrett's phone buzzed on the small table. A new message, unknown number, no name. The text was brief, precise. "You think the past is behind you, but someone still wants what Ruby represents. Be ready." Barrett felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. The victory he thought he had secured, the fragile sense of safety he and his family had begun to feel, it was only temporary. The danger hadn't vanished. It had only changed shape. He looked at Inaya. Her gaze met his, steady, unflinching, ready. Ruby stirred in her sleep, unaware of the unseen threats still circling them. Barrett clenched his jaw, his mind already racing. They had survived so much before, but this was new. He understood fully that earning his place in their lives would require more than humility and presence. It would require courage, vigilance, and unwavering protection. He exhaled slowly, steeling himself. They had come so far, yet the true test, one that would challenge every instinct, every decision, every bond, was only just beginning. Barrett's phone buzzed again, this time with a picture attached. Ruby in the park yesterday, smiling innocently. And in the background, a shadowy figure watching, camera in hand. The message was simple, chilling, direct. "We know where she is. We are closer than you think." Barrett's blood ran cold. The world he thought he had rebuilt was already under threat. Barrett stared at the photo, his chest tightening as Ruby's innocent smile contrasted sharply with the shadowy figure lurking behind her in the background. He felt a surge of fury and protectiveness that nearly overwhelmed him. Every instinct screamed to act, to shield, to destroy the threat before it even materialized. But he paused. He couldn't make mistakes. Not now. Not after everything. Inaya appeared beside him, steady and alert, her hand brushing his arm. "Barrett," she said softly, but there was steel beneath her tone. "We need a plan. Anger won't save her. Strategy will." Ruby, blissfully unaware of the danger, clutched her stuffed rabbit and hummed quietly. Barrett's heart ached. Every step forward, every breath they had fought to take, now balanced on a knife's edge. He swallowed, steadying himself. "Call the contacts," Barrett ordered. "Federal, private, whoever can track this." His voice was low but unshakable. He felt the weight of responsibility pressed down. No one else could protect them, not strangers, not lawyers, only him, only his family. Within minutes, Barrett's network was mobilized. Surveillance, digital tracking, cross-referencing social media footprints, and background checks all sprang into action. Each passing second was measured, deliberate, calculated. Time was the enemy, but preparation was the weapon. Inaya moved to Ruby, pulling her into a hug. "Sweetheart, everything is okay," she whispered, though her eyes scanned the window and the street outside. Barrett observed her, noting her careful blend of maternal instinct and strategic awareness. She was no longer the vulnerable woman he had once found on the kitchen floor. She was a warrior in her own right. Barrett's phone buzzed again. Another photo, closer this time. A hand holding a camera, lens trained directly at the playground where Ruby had laughed hours before. Barrett's jaw tightened. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how to strike fear, how to manipulate, how to test him. But he was no longer a man blind to truth or to deception. He turned to Inaya. "We need to lure them out, draw them into the light. They can't hide forever. Every resource, every letter, every camera, every trace to flush the predator out." She would not let Ruby's innocence become leverage for fear. Barrett realized then how much she had changed, not just survived, but sharpened, transformed into someone unstoppable when family was at stake. The hours passed in tense calculation. Barrett alternated between tracking devices, calls, maps, and surveillance feeds. Inaya stayed close, whispering updates and suggestions. Ruby slept quietly between them, oblivious to the storm around her, trusting the two adults who had rebuilt her world from ashes. Finally, a breakthrough. The network traced the shadowy figure to an abandoned warehouse near the river. The location was strategic, isolated with a clear line of escape, but Barrett didn't hesitate. He moved with precision, Inaya beside him, a calculated calm over both of them. Ruby remained safe at a secure location with trusted guardians they had arranged. The warehouse loomed as they approached, dark and silent. Barrett felt his pulse quicken, not from fear but from resolve. Every step was measured, every breath deliberate. He had learned over 6 years that control and patience often won where raw strength failed. Inside, the figure waited, smug, confident, thinking they had the upper hand. But Barrett and Inaya had something far stronger: unity, truth, and unrelenting love. Barrett's voice rang out first, commanding sharp, "Step away, you're done." The figure laughed, underestimating the intensity of a father and mother united. They lunged, but Inaya moved with unexpected agility, blocking and redirecting, while Barrett closed the distance with surgical precision. The struggle was brief but decisive. Barrett's hand found the camera, smashing it to pieces. Inaya restrained the figure until authorities, already tipped off, arrived. Silence followed. Heavy, weighty silence. The tension in Barrett's chest slowly eased, replaced by relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a profound sense of closure. He turned to Inaya, finding her eyes glimmering with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Ruby's safety was restored. Their fight had been won. But the victory was not about power. It was about presence, courage, and unwavering commitment. Barrett knelt before Inaya, not as a CEO, not as a Blackwell, but as a man stripped of pretense, accountable and earnest. "I'll spend every day earning my place with you, with her, with our family. I promise." Inaya studied him, her expression softening. She reached out and placed her hand over his. "You have your chance, but remember, earning trust is daily, not a single act, not a grand gesture. Daily." Ruby ran into their arms, a tangle of small limbs and joy, laughing, her innocence restored. Barrett and Inaya held her close, a triangle of protection, love, and resilience. For the first time, the past felt truly behind them, not erased, but acknowledged, understood, and left in its proper place. Barrett finally looked around the small apartment, the walls, the letters, the check still carefully stored in the drawer. Every scar, every memory, every mark of struggle had become part of their story. A story not of power, but of perseverance, not of wealth, but of dignity. Outside, the city of New Orleans shimmered under the evening sun, wet streets reflecting the light like a promise. They had survived the storms of betrayal, manipulation, and danger. They had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. Barrett realized something crucial. The empire he had stepped down from, the wealth and influence he had left behind, it was meaningless without family, love, and integrity. The man who once defined himself by power now defined himself by presence, by the quiet courage to protect, to nurture, and to rebuild. Inaya leaned against him, Ruby between them. "We have a life to live now," she whispered. Barrett nodded, feeling the weight of the promise, the responsibility, and the extraordinary gift of second chances. The apartment was quiet, but alive, filled with laughter, whispered plans, and the slow, steady rhythm of a family reclaimed. Barrett held them both, knowing that this time he would never let them go, not to manipulation, not to fear, not to the shadows of the past. Barrett looked out the window at the city that had once seemed so cold and unwelcoming. Somewhere in the distance, the soft echo of church bells carried across the river. He whispered almost to himself, "We survived the worst. Now, we finally get to live." The storm had passed. The empire had fallen. The lies had been exposed. And for the first time, Barrett, Inaya, and Ruby, together, stood on the threshold of a life they had earned, a life defined by love, courage, and dignity. The check on the wall was gone, but the lessons it represented, the resilience, the truth, the power of integrity, would never leave them.